You know, they say, just wait a couple weeks. If you don't like the weather, just wait a couple weeks. Wait a couple days. All right. A little cold snap. Yep. Yep. Test 1, 2. I need a little bit of juice. Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. I'm trying. There I am. Good morning. Whew. Well, good morning. It's good to see everybody. Welcome. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. If you're joining us online, welcome. This is our Sunday morning auditorium class. We have been, over the last few weeks, studying the life of David. Last week, we found ourselves in 2 Samuel, and so if you have your Bibles, that is, if I don't have my Bible, that is where we're going to be this morning. David, of course, has finally been anointed king over Israel. He has consolidated the kingdom. He's found him a capital. He has brought the people together, and now he has brought the people together nationally. Now he's trying to bring them together spiritually by bringing the Ark of the Covenant back to the center of Israelite worship. And we talked at length last time about how the ark was lost and how it was coming back. And that's where we're going to pick up this week. 2 Samuel chapter 6 is where that story is mostly found. We dug around in some other places to get some backstory for it. But for the most part, 2 Samuel 6. And you remember, I'm going to do a quick refresher. They had loaded the ark up on a cart and headed back up into Israel, headed to Jerusalem. I don't say back to Jerusalem because the ark wasn't in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was a city of the Jebusites, and we covered that a few weeks ago. But now it's David's capital, and he wants to bring the ark there, and really to consolidate. I mean, Israel in David's mind is still a theocracy. It's still ruled by God, not him, and he is simply God's man who is supposed to be doing that. So symbolically bringing the ark back and consolidating all rule in one place makes sense. So they load it up on a cart, they head back. You remember the story. There's dancing, there's celebration. The oxen stumble, the ark starts to tip. Young man named Uzzah reaches out, puts his hand on it. Bam, he's struck dead. Party shut down. David goes, knocks on some neighbor's door, says, we're going to park this thing here because it's dangerous, and gets mad at God, heads back to Jerusalem, and puts his religious advisors and all of his Bible scholars, for lack of a better term, to work to figure out what do we do? Why is God mad at us? And so they figure out it wasn't supposed to be on a cart. God had a way that it was supposed to be carried, and that wasn't it. And so they send back down. They load the cart back up, the poles in the sides of it, with the priests carrying it, as had always been the custom. They pick it up. They make it back to Jerusalem. Now, I want to look at three separate characters in this story and talk about some things that we can glean from this as modern believers. First of all, Uzzah. Uzzah is the young man who is struck dead because he puts his hand on the ark. Now, I've heard this preached a lot of different ways, and a lot of times it's preached in support of a precision obedience theology, that God wants us to do exactly things exactly the way he said, and if we don't do that, then we're going to get in trouble. And while that is part of the story, that's not why Uzzah was killed. Uzzah's not the one who decided to put the ark on a cart. Uzzah's not the one who is in charge here. Uzzah puts his hand out and touches the ark. So why is Uzzah killed? If it's not just because the ark is being transported incorrectly, why is Uzzah struck? And that's a complex question. It's not that simple to discern. But I do think there are some clues that we'll look at. Uzzah is not just some young man who's walking along beside the ark. Uzzah is one of the sons of Abinadab. Uzzah is of a priestly order, specifically the Kohathites, whose job it was to take care of the Ark of the Covenant. So Uzzah is not ignorant. This is not just some kid that's walking along and carelessly touches the ark. He should have known better. He should have known better in a lot of this stuff. And I read you a quote last time from theologian Hans Kung, who says, I am not surprised that Uzzah died as much as I am that the rest of us are still alive. And that resonates. There's something there, because Uzzah is not just steadying the ark. Well, let's open the floor up and let's talk a little bit about it. Why do you think Uzzah is struck? And I've given you some parameters. I've given you some ideas. But what did Uzzah do, Jason?
So I don't know. That's one thing that puzzles me, because first thing I think of is, what happened if he didn't stick his hand out and stop it from falling?
So yeah.
What if he fell and hit the ground and it busted open? Then what?
Okay. So yeah, Jason says, what would have happened if he didn't? If he hadn't have reached out to steady the ark and it had have toppled off and opened up. I mean, we just read a story last week where they opened it up just to see what was inside of it, and 70 people were killed. So there's something there. That's a good point. What do you think? Why is Uzzah struck? Stephen, I'm sorry, and then Ann. Okay.
He should have, if that was his responsibility, he should have stopped the ark from being carried that way in the first place.
Okay.
He was trying to do a good thing, I get it, but you should have known better. You shouldn't have been in that situation in the first place. At the same time, though, what if God wanted it to fall?
Okay. So.
God could have kept that thing perfectly still. He could have carried it himself, for crying out loud, but he let it be transported that way. What if it was supposed to fall?
Okay. Stephen says, first of all, that he should have known better, and that's correct. He should have known it shouldn't have been carried that way. He should have known, but also, what if the ark toppling had been the will of God? What if God wanted it to fall? And say that again. To make a lesson. Okay, expand on that a little bit, because
If Uzzah just touched it to save it and he was struck dead, then people needed to know the power of God when they disobeyed him.
absolutely. That Ann says that it was to teach a lesson. If Uzzah is struck dead just for touching it, then the people need to beware of the power of God. Larry, do you have your hand up?
The ark was sacred, which means set apart. So you don't reach up and touch things that are set apart. And I think we take for granted what sacred means sometimes. And then they're moving it like the Philistines moved it. When the Philistines got it, and then they sent it back, they sent it in a cart to see if it really was God's ark. And it really was. For the wrong people to use carts, that's fine. But this is another one of these things that God You gotta do what I tell you to do. They follow the same example, they put it in a cart and send it off. Well, let's put it in the cart and bring it on the rest of the way. No, you do it the way I told you.
You do it the way. So to reiterate that, first of all, the ark is sacred. And we don't always get that sacred, holy, set apart, and you don't mess with the things of God that are sacred, holy, and set apart. There needs to be some reverence. There needs to be some awe. There needs to be some respect. And last time I told you about a preacher friend of mine that used to joke that we need to put signs up in front of churches that say, "Beware of God," but because any being that can create universes with a word should scare us a little bit. That kind of power is scary. Second of all, the Philistines, when they are sending it back to Israel, slap it on a cart, send the oxen north and tell them to go. And so the Israelites, now we're going to move it. We're just going to slap it back on a cart, send it to Jerusalem. And part of the lesson here is, no, you don't do the things the way the other nations do the things. You do the things the way I told you to do. Israel is supposed to be set apart. Israel is supposed to be a light to the nations, not someone who follows along and does what they do. And I think that goes back to Ann's point of a lesson, that this is all part of the lesson. Ewan?
Break it down logically, it's fair. Like, you touched it, and the rules are, God had this law, you died. And so it wasn't unjust. I mean, it was, you knew, everybody knew, and you touched it. I think it contrasts with Jesus died. There's been grace and mercy. And, we touch the ark all the time, we can drop the dead every week, and
Absolutely.
contrast what it was like, and now we have this ridiculous.
That it was just. That there were rules in place. It wasn't unfair. It wasn't unjust. Uzzah knew the rules. Pretty much everybody knew the rules, whether they believed them or 100% followed them or not. They knew you weren't supposed to touch the ark, even if that was just through folklore or stories. You should have known, and so it wasn't unjust. And Ewan makes the point that we all the time don't, back to Larry's point, hallow the name of God, for lack of a better term. The holiness. We pray the Lord's Prayer, hallowed be your name, but then sometimes we come into the presence of God and treat it like a random Tuesday. It's I'm gonna come in here and quote Donald Trump, I'm gonna eat my little cracker and drink my little juice and be on my way. But unfortunately, that is a lot of the ways we think about it. Stephen?
This isn't the first time God has done something like this.
Right?
Lot's wife don't look back. What did she do? And what was the consequence? She didn't necessarily do anything bad. I mean, we all look back all the time, but the point is there's a lesson here.
Mm-hmm.
If you're gonna obey me, you're gonna follow me, then I have standards that you need to follow, or you're going to pay the consequence. In more modern times, we've seen that happen again. And I don't remember where it was, and anybody can Google this. I mean, there was a church where the priest made fun of God in the church during one of his lessons. Within 24 hours, that entire church was burnt to the ground. There was a parade in Rio, which I've always wanted to visit Rio, but now I'm not so sure, where they celebrated LGBTQ. And during the parade, they had homosexuals climbing up on the cross, mocking God, doing whatever they wanted. Within 24 hours, God hit the statue of Jesus Christ with a bolt of lightning to permanently disfigure that statue. This is not the first time that God has said, you really want to play this game? I've seen it on a very small scale where a young man I used to know, there was a crocodile, and some of you have heard the story, I know, but there was a crocodile thing was, that wasn't me, that was him. I was about as far away from the.
Right, and
I was just gonna say that sometimes knowing the consequences aren't strong enough to overcome the desire.
ooh, sometimes knowing the consequences aren't strong enough to overcome the desire. And maybe that's a little bit of foreshadowing because we're going to see that from David. That'll preach right there. But yeah, God will not be put in a box. And I think that's one of the lessons here. Your God is not an idol like the Philistine God that had his head and hands broke off in front of the ark. It's not a box. Your God is bigger than that. And part of the lesson of Uzzah is that God's not going to be contained. He's not going to be put in a box. He's not going to put in an idol. He's not going to be put in a calf. Whatever story you want to keep going back to, God is not going to be put in the box, and consequently, God doesn't need me to defend him. God doesn't need me to be his caretaker. If God wanted that ark to fall off of that box, or that box to fall off of that cart, as we talked about a minute ago, even Uzzah couldn't have stopped it. I mean, this is God, and God is not in a box or on a cart, or I'm starting to sound like Dr. Seuss. But you get the point. And so then I guess we've got to pull that now forward thousands of years and talk about how do we put God in a box? Because I do think sometimes we're guilty of that. We put God in a box. Sometimes the box is so many 100 square feet, and our box has an address, but this is the holy place, and inside the holy place for the holy hour, it's got to be a certain way, but the rest of my life, it doesn't have to be. And sometimes we put God in a box, and God's not going to be contained. He's not going to be put in a box. And it goes back to that idea of beware of God. So let me expand that a little bit, see if anybody wants to jump in this morning. How do we put God in a box? Okay, tell me what you mean by our worship.
And every church I've ever been to, whether it was a Jewish synagogue or it was a Church of Christ or whatever, they all have their traditions, they all have their routines, they all have their things that they do that they think is pleasing to God.
Mm-hmm.
I have friends that have been turned away from churches because they don't trust us.
Mm-hmm.
You're putting God in your box because you think this is what worship is supposed to look like.
We have our traditions and our way of doing things, whatever faith tradition we're a part of, and sometimes those become a box. Okay, Ann?
Sometimes, though, we put God in a box when we think we can do the job better.
Ooh.
This is what he said, and that he can't control it, that he can't complete the task.
We're
Put in a box according to how our belief is about him.
and we're going to help God out. When we think God can't do it on his own, or he needs me to facilitate for him. Hang on, let's see if the sleepy side of the room's got anything to add. I'm just messing with y'all. Okay, what were you going to add, Steve?
Or even maybe we think we should be the ones to take care of it, nothing to God. This is below God. He doesn't need to be involved in this because this is something so small. He's greater than this. This is something I should take care of because God doesn't need to worry about the little things.
That we think our things are beneath God, or us as God is a God in a box, is a God of ritual and religion. You know, the last Wednesday I went over and Todd asked me to come over and lead the conversation on Wednesday night at the KFC, and one of the things that we were talking about is one of the biggest enemies of Christianity is religion. Now you think about that, and that doesn't make any sense, but it does make sense, because we start putting things in a box, and the ritual or the rule becomes more important than what we're trying to be about in the first place. And let's go back. Remember, I told you way back when we started, I don't know if you can remember that far back, but way back when we started, 1 Samuel 16, the thesis statement of this entire story is man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And so once again, Uzzah's God is a God of outward appearance. It's a box, it's the rules, it's the constraint, it's those kind of things. Because you got to ask the question, if you're going to ask the question, why is Uzzah struck dead, then you got to follow through, who's in charge? Why isn't David struck dead? Because David authorizes all this stuff. David is the king. David is the one leading. David is the one in charge. If Uzzah's struck dead, why isn't David? Kelly?
The verses before that, they're walking beside the cart and they're celebrating. They're all celebrating.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't say they're worshiping. They're celebrating with all their might, and they've got songs and harps. And then Uzzah doesn't really seem to be a part of that. He's walking with the cart and reaches out, I guess, and then but then David's mad in verse 8. I was wondering, who is David angry at David himself because he realized God's wrath against him, or the God, or I don't know, it all seems
No, there's some good points there. As they're walking, it says that they're celebrating, that everybody's celebrating with all their might. Does not say that they're worshiping. It says that they're celebrating. Uzzah doesn't seem to be a part of that. He's walking beside the cart. And then after that, David is angry. And who's he angry at? Is he angry at himself because he should have known better? Is he angry at Uzzah for messing up the party? Is he angry at God? That's a question that bears discussion. Anybody want to chime in on that? Jason?
I was reading it before, and I don't recall where it was, but it does say that, David was angry because the Lord had broken out against Judah in that place called Judah. So it said that David was angry at the Lord for doing that.
So David is angry because the Lord had broken out, is the word it used there, and so it implies that David is angry. It does say in verse 9 that David was afraid of the Lord that day, and said, how can the ark of the Lord come to me? And so there's something there. I personally, and this is just my opinion, that's not worth very much, but I think David's mad at God. What's wrong? What did I do? Why are you mad? Why are you striking people down? And there's something important there. Because, sometimes I'll meet people and they'll say, well, this event happened, this traumatic thing happened in my life, and I'm mad at God about it, and I can't come to church because I'm mad at God. And being angry at God is not disbelief. First of all, God's a big boy. He can handle your anger. It doesn't intimidate him. And second of all, you don't get angry at a box. You don't get, I guess sometimes when I've been putting together IKEA furniture, but the point, you don't get angry at an inanimate object. You know, if your God is an idol, or if it's a box, or if it's rules and regulations, that's not really something you get angry at. You get angry because there's still some kind of passion, some kind of faith, some kind of belief there. And so there's a contrast there. Once again, David's faith and Uzzah's faith. Jason, were you going to add something? I thought I saw your hand. I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
I did want to say too that, I think it's right here can be considered a lock.
Oh, that's a good point.
Maybe, we don't put God in it, but maybe we get God out of it.
Okay. Sometimes our technology is a box, and we may not put God in it, but we get God out of it. So let's, go ahead, Larry.
To say that also in verse 9, David was afraid of the Lord, and in the way he worded, how shall the ark of the Lord come to me? Once again, David's forgetting what you had said, that it's theocracy, it's not a kingdom. He's saying, I want the ark to be with me to solidify my position, rather than I want God's presence where the capital is now. How he words that shows his heart's not always right.
Absolutely. That David, when he says, how can the ark of the Lord come to me, it's once again showing that his heart's not perfect. He's not always right. And I've told you, this is not a morality tale, be like David. This is a tale of God and his relationship to his people. And David is still worried about political ramifications. You know, I want to bring this ark to this capital and consolidate power, consolidate the rule of Israel in one central location. There's a little bit more going on than just I want to be in the presence of God. So we're going to come back to David in a minute. I want to jump to the other end of the story now and talk about Michal. Hebrew, her name would be more like Michal, but I'm not going to do that, and these guys are going to thank me for that. But I don't try to do the pronunciations because it just makes me look stupid, because I'm not good at it. But we've talked about her a little bit already. Michal is David's first wife, the one way back that was the daughter of Saul, that he is offered. Remember, having the king's daughter was supposed to be a reward for killing Goliath, for whoever killed Goliath. And they tried to get David to take it, and he's like, who am I? How can I be the king's son-in-law? I'm not doing that. And they try to, multiple times to get him to accept that. And finally, Saul is trying to find a way to manipulate him and says, what will it take? And he comes up with this brilliant idea that, okay, you can be the king's son-in-law if you bring a bride price, dowry or whatever, of 100 Philistine foreskins. And that's the bride price. Now, Philistines are not going to part with their foreskins willingly, so he assumes that that's going to take care of this upstart young punk, and I'll get rid of him, the easy way. Oh, too bad, you couldn't do that. But David, of course, being David and being blessed by God, comes back with 200 Philistine foreskins, and Michal is given to him to be his wife. He has since, when he consolidates power, he reclaims Michal, and we talked about that. She has been given to another man. She has a life, but David says, no, she's mine. Bring her back to me. I'm not going to negotiate with you unless you show up with Michal. And once again, she's a pawn in this game. She's not, nobody asks Michal who she wants to be with. Nobody's consulting her. She's a pawn. She's being moved back and forth like a chess piece by all the men involved. And so she's had a hard life. And you can sympathize a little bit that maybe she has a little bit of bitterness. She is the princess. She's been the princess her entire life, and now she is the king, the queen rather, married to the king. And as she stands by her window watching the processional, 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 16, as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. Alexander White, in his commentary, says, "Those who are deaf always despise those who dance." It's an interesting quote. Michal would have been comfortable walking beside the ark with Uzzah. That would have fit right in with her personality. She's not concerned with celebration or the worship even. She is chastising David. She's not chastising David for failing to follow God's laws. She is mocking David for being undignified. And she wants him to be more kingly, to be more regal, to act like a king. We look at Michal, and I said we've got to give her a little bit of sympathy and a little bit of grace, but we also what is her viewpoint here? And I would say where Uzzah's is artificial, right? He's viewing God in a box. Michal's is superficial. It's more about how it looks. It's more about how it appears to other people. It's more about acting like a king. It's more about being dignified. And so sometimes in that attitude of the superficial, it's better to look good than to actually be engaging God. Many years ago, when I was a youth minister, I was teaching a class on David, and we were talking about this story, and I had a lady argue with me vehemently that Michal was right. That Michal was right, and David should not have been dancing. And we talked a little bit about it, and I'm not dismissing this lady. She was genuine in her faith and what she believed. But the problem with that is, out of the people in this story, there's one that's struck dead, one that's condemned to barrenness, and one that's later called a man after God's own heart. And you're picking the other two. That seems like you're putting your money on the wrong horse. And I've heard this in churches. Sometimes you'll get the weaker brother argument from Romans 14. When I was a youth minister, we got that. I had a gentleman who argued that the teenagers clapping during church was causing him to stumble. And that was a unique take for me. I thought that was a unique use of that scripture, that a 85-year-old man who'd been a Christian for 60 plus years had a weaker faith than a 15-year-old. That's what you're saying to me. And I asked him, do we need to pray for you publicly, or you want to just call the elders privately? And he's like, what? No, I want you to stop them kids from clapping. I said, well, you're telling me they're causing you to sin. Well, no, I didn't say I was sinning. Where'd you get that from? Well, you used Romans 14. And it said if your brother's causing you to sin, so they're causing you to sin by clapping is what you're saying. So how do we need to deal with your sin? And you get how that conversation went. I've told you the story about my grandfather telling me stories about his grandfather getting kicked out of church because he didn't pray right. he was one of those old hardline guys, and he believed that if you're going to pray, you had to pray in a appropriate position. And he believed that bowed head and folded hands was a papist invention. That was what the old generation called Catholic. But it was a papist invention, and there was no there was no scriptural authorization for that. And so you either laid down face down on the ground, or you stood with your hands lifted in prayer. And that was, long time ago, my grandfather's grandfather, so you know how old that is. But anyway, the point is, too many churches are ruled by Michael. Too many churches are ruled by this majority who is sitting in judgment on those who are seeking after God's heart. I mean, David is worshiping God with this effervescent, demonstrative faith, and Michael is not happy about it, not because he's worshiping God, but because he's not doing it correctly. He doesn't look right. Joe? Absolutely. He had a linen ephod on, which it could be just the undergarment, and don't get hung up on that when we say David's worshiping in his underwear. He's not out there in his tighty whities. He's wearing, there was an outer robe and an inner robe, and you strip your outer robe off when you're working or whatever. But linen ephod is also what all the priests wore. And so there is something to that. And you got to figure if David came out knowing he was going to be in the presence of the ark, he may have worn a linen ephod for that purpose, because he knew that the priests wore that. And I don't know that. I'm going totally supposition and making that leap. But yeah, there's something there. I think the question is, for churches, is how do we love a Michael but not let her rule the church? Does that make sense? How do I? Because I don't want anybody to be condemned or pushed out or discarded. And so. How do we balance that? Because there's some, who just, they just cast Michael aside because she's not the hero of the story. But Michael's is a soul as well. We want her here. So how do we include Michael without catering to her, if that's making any sense? I'm seeing a lot of confused faces, and I feel like I'm not answering the question very well, but let's just shut up and open up the floor and see if anybody knows what I'm talking about. Anybody want to jump in on this? Say again? Norma. I'm going to go with Norma first, Steve.
I'm maybe not being looking at it the same way you were, we were saying. She, to me, we don't know where her heart is.
Absolutely.
So that makes a big difference in how we would treat her. She's reacting out of, just resentment and anger because she didn't get to play up, like you said earlier. She doesn't get to play a part in this. She just has to do what he's ordering.
Mm-hmm.
And so, whenever you're hurt by that, then human nature is to just kind of lash out. So that may have been, she may have not really had an opinion about David at all. She just wants to lash out.
And that's a good point, that we don't really know her motivations. And so we are making some leaps, and we have to acknowledge that. And if she is living in a place of bitterness or resentment or whatever, if she is just a pawn that's been pushed from one side to the other, obviously she would have some resentment for that. But she may not be. It may not have anything to do with the ark. It may just be that she's lashing out. Is that a fair restatement of what you're saying? That she may just be lashing out, and that's a possibility as well. Mm. That this is a classic moment of discord like we see in churches. And there will be differences of opinion, there will be differences of understanding, and that's why we have leadership. That at some point, if we can't counsel, if we can't talk about it, if we can't figure it out, at some point you need somebody to make a decision and say, this is the way it's going to be, and hopefully, Scripture is our ultimate authority in those decisions. That's what we want. But yeah, there has to be. We can't cater to every whim, or otherwise you just become this nebulous body that never does anything. Or you look like Huntsville and you have a different church on every corner, because every time there's a disagreement, somebody splits off and goes their own way. And I'm not picking on Huntsville. That's pretty much just about every town, especially in Texas. But there's that happens some way. The attitude of the superficial is one of those things that hopefully we can read this and learn from, even if it is a cautionary tale, because the attitude of the superficial is an attitude of barrenness. It doesn't produce fruit. Okay, and I realize I'm making a little bit of a metaphorical jump, but stay with me, because that attitude of barrenness doesn't produce fruit, because it's so concerned with looking the part and what other people think that there's not a whole lot of real work getting done. You know what I'm saying? If you're out trying to get work done, whatever your work is, if you're more worried about what it looks like than you are with the task at hand, you're not going to get real far at some point. And I don't care whether that's herding cattle or working on a car or writing a sermon. If I'm more worried about what it looks like than what I'm supposed to be doing, then I don't get a lot accomplished. I couldn't tell if your hand was up, but I didn't want to single you out.
So my commentary in my letter says that Michael had spiritual barrenness.
Ooh.
That's why she never had any kids.
Mm.
And that it like in her heart to Saul's heart.
Say that last part again.
It like in her heart to Saul's heart.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Courtney says her commentary says that Michael has this attitude of barrenness, and it compares her heart to Saul's heart. It likens her heart to Saul's heart, which, she's Saul's child, so I get that. And that's I think that's spot on. That's part of it. And that number one, that attitude of the superficial leads to barrenness is number one. But number two, I don't have the right to judge anyone else's worship. I mean, that's almost scriptural. Who are you to judge another man's servant? I don't have the right to judge how you worship. I don't have the right to judge how you engage God. That's between you and God. And I have the right to control my own. And I'm going to, stand or fall based on what I do in the face of God in that. But do I have the right to judge somebody else's worship? Hang on, I'm going to go Joe and then Larry, and then I'll come to you, Steve. You're going to have to say it again. I'm getting to the age where I can't hear. Yeah, we're supposed to work out our own salvation. What's good for me may not be good for you. Larry, go ahead.
So David continues to have this celebratory worship as the ark is returning. When the time before in the cart they were doing that, that's not what upset God. What upset God was casual nature, when you touch the ark of the covenant, you do it wrong. So there is this lesson. Some people would like to have it be you got to follow the rules right, and also though Michael is upset that the rules aren't being followed, the king shouldn't be so undignified. That's not what upset God there. There's a balance that needs to be struck, and that's where your comment about we need to make sure that everybody understands and not cast away in their opinion, not listen to, and that appreciate Tom's comment. That's the leadership's job, is to talk with people and say this is why we believe this scripture speaks louder than that scripture, because there's going to be times that there will be a difference of opinion.
Absolutely. That what angers God here is not the celebration. What the problem is not that David is celebrating. It's that God is failing to be hallowed, for lack of a better term. That we're not putting God in a place of the sacred, of the holy, of the, and I think if Michael had a concern like that, your worship is failing to hallow the name of God, that might have been a little bit more valid than you don't really look like a king right now. Yeah, Stephen, I told you I was coming.
I think a lot, even in our own stance of what we believe on the right way to worship God, determines a lot on our heart and what we're willing to study and what we're looking to look past. And what I mean by that, Jason, I'm sorry for going to deep with it.
No, you're good.
Jason is probably one of my closest friends in this congregation. When I first met Jason, he was wearing this ratty old t-shirt and a pair of shorts when he came into town. And my way of growing up, and I don't condone this at all, I would have been told to stay as far away from Jason as possible
Right.
because of the way he looked. Because he didn't look like somebody that was supposed to be in a church. And I said, Jason, I'm sorry for throwing you under the place, but that's how, but it went beyond that too. And I think a lot of it all depends on your own vanity and what's in your heart and what you believe is what's right. Even, and I was warned about this too when I went off to college, you have to be careful about staying faithful to God when you're in college, because now it's no longer your parents' faith, it's yours. And you can get stuck in that church of Steve, which I got stuck in.
Absolutely, and I hate to cut us short because we finally just got rolling, but we are way over time, and so I apologize for that. But thank you for your input and conversation this morning. We'll pick up here next week. In the meantime, you have about 12 minutes to get out and hug a neck, shake a hand, and get ready. We'll be back in here for worship. Thank you.